Booktown on Sunday is presented by Creative Clunes, a vibrant rural hub that supports making, telling and sharing stories in all art forms.
Good afternoon and welcome to Booktown on Sunday, streaming from Clunes and from Maruga, I believe. We acknowledge the traditional owners on the land on which we work and live and pay our respects to the elders, both past, present and emerging. I'd now like to hand you to Paul Fleckney, who will be hosting this chat with Karl. And over to you, Paul. I should say also that if you wish to pose a question to Dr. Karl, please do so via the chat window. You'll be able to access that by going down to the bottom of your black screen and clicking on the chat button, which brings up your chat window on the right, should be on the right-hand side. Questions through there, and then I will pose those to Paul or to Karl as we go along. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, and I've even typed in there, howdy. So because we're here for the audience, you can override Paul and me at any stage by putting in a better question.
Yep.
So, yes, Paul, my favourite colour is blue, right? Just kidding.
So, well, thank you, Karl, so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you giving up the time to talk to us. You know, being an Englishman, I obviously can't start any conversation without starting with the weather. It was pretty hot there in Sydney today.
Yeah, we're heading up to about 37, 38. And if you look back at the last 20 years globally, 19 of the 20th hottest years ever have happened in the last 20 years, 19. But I have 4 messages of good hope for our members in the audience, especially the younger ones. And the thing about these messages of good hope is that they are correct. So firstly, we've gone past the end of the beginning for COVID-19. We're getting the vaccines. We're heading for the beginning of the end. And this time next year, we'll be well and truly out into some sort of new normal. And around the middle of the next year, we'll start recovering. So there's light at the end of the tunnel. And thankfully, because we live in Australia, we've got very few dead people. Oh, thank God for that. Second message of good hope, we can actually stop and reverse global warming. I'm writing, that's what my next book is about. Third message of good hope. Oh, by the way, it's a lie when they tell you we can't. They just want you to feel depressed, so you don't do anything about it. Third message of good hope. Anybody who's under the age of, say, 20, firstly, for every second you've been alive, we've had a permanently operated space station with humans in it. It's coming up to 20 years and 2 weeks anniversary of when it started being permanently occupied. That's the first thing. Second thing is that if you're under the age of 20, you are the smartest generation ever in the history of the human race. And we know this, it's in my red book, Short Back in Science, where Flynn looked at the records of IQ tests in the American military from 1932 onwards, and to his surprise, found that the IQ was going up by 9 IQ points every generation, and every country in the world we've tested it is doing that, and it's still going on. We don't know why. It is real. So you people under the age of 20, you're smarter than people over 20. You don't know as much yet, but you will, and you'll have the advantage of being smarter so you can fix things. And the last message of good hope is that you are living in the most peaceful time ever in the history of the human race. Read the book Factfulness by Hans Rosling, which you can buy from, I do believe, Clunes Booktown. Or the better, that one, Factfulness by Hans Rosling, you can read in an afternoon. And then the other one, The Better Angels of Our Nature by Steven Pinker, that'll take you about a week. On the other hand, it'll be a worthwhile week. And so on the big scale and the small scale, everything's getting better. So people wrongly say, oh my God, we've had the Second World War, which was the worst on a percentage basis of deaths ever. No. If you go back to the year 755 AD, in that year in China, to put down a revolt by somebody called An Lushan, the Chinese emperor killed 1 every 3 people in China, 1 every 6 in the whole world. Genghis Khan in the 12 and 1300s, he killed 1 in every 9 people on earth to build the largest land empire ever. And as a result, I've got Genghis Khan DNA. So that was 1 in 9. Second World War, 1 in 44. Better. Still bad, but better. So 1 in 6, 1 in 9, 1 in 44, we're heading the right pathway. And on a small scale, murders, violence, judicial torture, slavery, all heading down. Why do you wrongly believe that things are so bad? Because of the motto of the commercial media, for which I have worked for several decades. I'm sorry. And the motto is, if it bleeds, it leads. If there's a car accident outside your library, or your library gets a bunch of books, which one makes it the news? The one with the blood. Okay, enough of me speaking. Over to you, Paul. Any questions from? No, not a single question from the audience.
Not yet.
Oh, come on, Kim and Raphael and Andy and Mesh and Wendy and Fiona and Jane and Graham. Talk. I'm looking at you. Come on. Okay, over to you, Paul.
Let's just move to your next book and to talk about global warming, but maybe we'll do that later. But with your current book, which I've got here as well, so Surfing Safari Through Science, which is also your backdrop. Before we get into some of the details, what was your general inspiration here for writing this book? Why did you want to write this book?
Because I have a short attention span and I'm attracted to anything bright and shiny. So when I found that there was a fish that could swim upstream, even though it was dead, and a whale that could swim against the seas, even though it was dead, I had to do a story on it. And then I added something extra, which is the augmented reality, the holograms. So if you download the modestly named Dr. Karl app onto your phone and then aim it at the story about dead fish swimming, blow me down, you'll see me popping up like a little hologram. Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only help against the evil empire. And then, okay, I say something different. And then if you click on one of the buttons under my feet, the left one, you'll actually see a movie of a dead fish swimming. It's a fish, it's dead, and it's swimming upstream. Show of hands here. Has anybody managed to get the hologram going? It tells you how to do it on page 5. Nobody. Oh, one. And you're the one who had to.
Yeah.
What about page 2? Anybody? Did you get it going, Heather? No. Not one person has managed to get the hologram going, even though I spent thousands of dollars to make it work. That's okay.
It's pretty awesome. Is there any way we think we can demo it over Zoom? What do you reckon, Carl?
Sure. I'll just find a phone. Here's a phone. Yeah. Now I'll just find a book. Do I have any books? Oh, yeah, there's one over there. Hang on, back in a second. Any other questions while we're waiting? Oh, here's some questions.
Yes,
we have got a couple of questions.
We do.
Yeah. I'm downloading new content, so we have to wait. Okay, keep going.
So Poppy and Alana have said, what is your favorite part about science? So where's Poppy and Alana? I'm just having a look. You want to give us a wave? Yep. Hi, Poppy and Alana. They want to know, Karl, Dr. Karl, what is your favorite part about science?
The fact that it's self-correcting. So if I try and say to you, hey, the sky is green with yellow polka dots, you'll say, well, I'm looking at it right now, it's blue. And I'll say, oh, I made a mistake. Whereas in practically every other activity that humans do, people have difficulty in admitting they've made mistakes. And so part of the reason in America that medical scientist, Dr. Fauci, is so popular is that he cheerfully admits when he makes a mistake and says, I did make a mistake. This is what we should have said. And so that's what I like about science, that it's self-correcting. So science is not a bunch of facts. That's an encyclopedia. Science is a way of trying to discover the universe around you. And along the way, you get all sorts of weird stuff happening. Look, we're up to 96%. You'll come 98%. Okay, who's next now? Another question.
Another question. What do you know about dyslexia and how it runs in families?
It's amazing that there's not more dyslexia around. Roughly about 15% of the population have some kind of difficulty in reading. And if you think about it, we split off from the chimpanzees about 7 million years ago. And then not much happened for about 5 million years until 2 million years ago when things really began to happen. And the big happening was that we lost our body hair and that freed up a whole lot of protein. Hair's made of protein. So we lost our body hair and that freed up a lot of protein, and the protein went into our brains. And our brains started getting bigger 2 million years ago. Now, as a fighting animal, we humans are pretty gutless. Nothing much going for us. But we do have our big brains and the ability to talk to each other and tell each other stories. And so we could put ourselves into groups. And we invented writing maybe 10, 20,000 years ago. And so when you think of writing, where you look at a bunch of squiggles and say, that means turn left, turn right, or happy birthday. You think about writing having been for around about maybe 5,000, 10,000 years. Out of 2 million years, it's really surprising that dyslexia is that uncommon. 85% of people don't have it. And there are sometimes you can do things to get around it. Luckily, we've got a world where there's a lot of visual stuff and audio stuff where you can actually put text into voice. The trouble is you can't read as fast. I mean, you can't listen as fast as you can read, but it's still better than how it used to be. Okay, I'm going to give it a go now. Here we go. Here's my book cover for the last book. So I'm going to get my phone, and here's my phone. I'm going to aim it at the book, and what does it do? G'day, and welcome to the Augmented Reality, or book number 45. If you look down there, you'll see there's a bunch of buttons that you can press or tap out with your finger, and when you do, oh, there's a little me down there. Okay, you're better off doing it at home. It really works. I'll now go back to my ugly room, away from my room and back into the better background. Here we go. Okay, next person.
That's great. So we've got a few questions, but I'll just add a couple more of my own first before we get into this, Karl. And I know we have a lot of younger people on this call, but I think it is, worth hearing from you why you love the anal sphincter so much. You said it's your second favorite organ.
Well, my favorite organ is the uterus because it starts off like the size of a clenched fist. And every single human grew up in one, and this is a weird bit, drinking your own wee for the first 9 months of your life because amniotic fluid is mostly wee. Gross, kids. I can see some of the kids looking at each other going, that's gross. Yeah, okay. And then, so that's my first favorite organ, but the second favorite one is the anal sphincter because I did gastroenterology when I was a medical doctor for a brief time, and I just loved it to pieces. The thing I like about gastro and neurology is that in each case, you can get most of the way to a diagnosis. You can get a diagnosis 70% of the time just by talking to the patient and asking questions and listening carefully, then asking another question and listening question. For another 15% of the time, you actually have to lay your hands on their body. And then you just feel stuff. And then and only 15% of the time, you actually have to go and get a laboratory investigation or an x-ray or something. And the thing about gastro I loved about it is in most cases, you can fix it as well. So when I was in gastro, I fell in love with the anal sphincter because get your hands like this and make a fist. Right? So you got your fist like this. So you're making a fist. Like not a fist, you got your two hands stuck together. So like that. Yeah, but just this way. So imagine you got your two hands like this, and you go to a river, and you pick up some water, and you can drink water out of that. Now, imagine that that's your anal sphincter, and on the inside is some solid, some liquid, and some gas. And about a dozen times a day, you'll have a fart, and all you'll lose is gas. No solid, no liquid. Hallelujah! Oh my God! So that's why it's my second favorite organ. And it turns out that there's an animal that can actually lose its anus. And it's a scorpion, and it's got its anus right at the very end of its tail instead of between its legs. Bit of a design fault there. But that's evolution for you. Evolution is not perfect, just good enough. And so if it loses its tail, then there's nowhere for it to poo out. So it just sort of keeps on eating and getting a little bit bigger, and every now and then it sort of goes and sort of forces open a hole in the body. Okay, it's kind of messy. Sorry about that.
There we go. Wow. So now all of these stories that Dr. Karl is talking about are in his latest book, which is The Surfing Safari. So I really highly recommend you get hold of a copy of that, find out more. We go to some questions now, Karl. So the next one is from Tom. And Tom asked you, how did you get into science?
Well, accidentally. When I went to school, I went to primary school, and that was just fine. Then I went to high school, and really the only subjects that you could do were English and French and Latin and chemistry and physics and maths and science. So I just did it, all of them. There were no other options. And I found that it was fun. It was really fun. The thing I liked about science, that once you get into it, what you're doing is you load your brain up with a mental toolbox. Like a car mechanic, they've got a physical toolbox, spanners, ring, open, ended, et cetera, et cetera. And in the case of science, you get a mental toolbox and then you can understand the world around you. I still haven't got the answer, though, to why the sky looks green before it begins to hail, and I'm still working out where dirt comes from. And I'm still working on dreams as well. But science helps you get a little bit closer. So I like the way that it gives you an answer. And science tells you that if you've got a worldwide pandemic, mate, before you get a vaccine, you got to do a combination of rolling lockdowns, if you've got any infections, plus contact tracing. And as a result, Victoria is heading for 28 days without an infection. Think of all those people who didn't die because of that. And science, whereas in America, they've gone in the last month from 100,000 new cases a day to 200,000 because they're not following the science. So one of the greatest discoveries that science ever made was that you should keep your drinking water separate from your sewerage water. Has anybody here been to Bali? Show of hands. Anybody been to Bali? Nobody. When you go to Bali, they don't know that. And you go traveling into the countryside and you'll see somebody in a village and they'll just poo into the water, even though their brother or sister lives at the next village downstream and has to drink that water. Whereas in Australia, we know that. So science has helped us have a better life and people live longer and happier, hopefully.
Thanks, Karl. We'll come back to some of the other questions shortly. I love that you, in this book, you bring things right up to date with COVID, with 5G. And I just think, there's an interesting little thread here. I read something recently in the London Review of Books by James Meek about conspiracy theories. And he was quoting a survey done by Oxford University in the UK in May of this year. And this survey said that 75% of British people who were surveyed doubted that COVID was caused by effectively, the official scientific explanation of that it came via, transmitted via animals, via bats or via some other species, and that 21% of people believed that 5G was to blame for COVID. So
1 in every 5 people.
1 in every 5 people surveyed by Oxford University in the UK. What does this mean for science?
It means that we need to have more science communication and stick to the science. And in this case, we're seeing a terrible example where if people stick to the science, you have fewer dead people. Whereas if you ignore the science, like in America and the United Kingdom, you get more dead people. So on the 1st of August this year, both the United Kingdom and Victoria had about 500 to 700 new cases a day. Victoria went into lockdown and has been zero for over 20-something days. United Kingdom heading up to 30,000 cases a day, and of that, about 1%, 300 will die. They don't have to die. They did not have to die, but for various reasons, the science wasn't followed, and so you got extra people who are dying and sick.
Okay. So thanks for that, Karl. We'll go back to some of the other questions that have come through. So Raphael and Bernie Del Real have asked, how is Mentos and Coke a physical change, not a chemical change? So adding Mentos to Coke, is it a physical change or a chemical change?
Physical.
And so why is it physical and not chemical? That was the question.
Okay. Firstly, let me introduce you to the concept of a gas. So we used to have a prime minister who said that carbon dioxide is a weightless, harmless gas. He was wrong. It has weight. So if you're looking at champagne has 12 grams of carbon dioxide in each bottle. And that's got a pressure of about 60 tons per square metre. So the glass on champagne bottles has to be a lot thicker. Otherwise, the bottles will break. So a case of champagne, 750 mils each bottle, is heavier than a case of white wine, 750 mils a bottle, because the glass is thicker. So you've got this gas called carbon dioxide. So I have to bring together a whole bunch of concepts. Concept number 1, atoms. Now, I'll get this out of the way for people who don't know what atoms are. And by the way, in Australia, with our education system, you don't get taught about atoms until year 9 in high school, and only if you're doing science. So there's a significant number of people out there who don't know what an atom is. An atom is the smallest part of an element. There's about 92 of them or so. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, helium, fluorine, uranium. And the way an atom looks is kind of like a pea in a football field. So you've got a little dense bit, the pea, which is very massive, and then all this empty space, and then out where the crowd sits, that's where you have the electrons, and that's what an atom is. Okay, now we can talk about water. Water, H2O, is made of 3 atoms in the shape of a right angle. H2O, H, and then an O in the middle. It's not quite a right angle. It's actually a bit bigger. It's 104.5 degrees. So if you've got a glass of absolutely pure water with nothing in it but water, it's actually a whole bunch of boomerangs stuck together, just floating around, attracting each other, letting go, attracting each other, letting go. Now, let me introduce you the concept of the 3 states of matter. The 3 states of matter are solid, liquid, and gas. And depending, you can make things change from one state to the other. So if you've got liquid water, if you cool it down to 0, it goes solid. If you warm it up to 20 degrees, it goes liquid again. If you heat up to 100, it goes into a gas. But sometimes you can trick it with things we call nucleation centers. And this happens several times a year, so don't do this at home, where people boil up some water for instant coffee or a tea bag of tea in the microwave, and you don't get good stirring. When you boil water on the stove, it goes like this. So you get good mixing and stirring, and all of it is at 100 degrees centigrade. But in the microwave oven, you might have some water at the top at 99 degrees centigrade, and underneath it is some other water at 101 degrees centigrade, hotter than the boiling point. But it can't turn into a gas because of the weight of the overlying water. But if you mix some dust particles in with it, called nucleation centers, fancy word, look it up on Wikipedia. If you introduce some little dust, like from the dust in a tea bag or from coffee powder, it'll come through the water at 99 degrees, go down to the water at 101 degrees centigrade, and then it changes state from liquid into gas and expands in volume by 1,700 times. And about 3 or 4 times a year, people get a face full of boiling water and have to go to hospital. Okay, now you've got enough background. So what we have in Coca-Cola is a lot, in between the boomerangs of water, you've also got these barbells of other boomerangs as well, of carbon dioxide. So that's it's the molecules are sitting there individually. So there's a molecule of carbon dioxide here, like a little triangle, another one over there, another one over there, and they can't get together until you drop in a nucleation center. So if you go to Coca-Cola and then just simply drop in some powder or a Mentos, which has a really rough, bumpy surface, and just the really tiny, tiny bumps via fancy physics, which I won't go into now, they help the carbon dioxide turn from being dissolved in between the molecules of water into coagulating together. And suddenly you get these bubbles of carbon dioxide forming and it foams over like crazy. It's a physical change. Now, go and chase up the video on this on Veritasium, Derek Muller, Veritasium, and he'll give you the same explanation from a different point of view with better graphics. And so that'll give you an idea of what's going on. By the way, often I'm learning something new. I have to repeat it 5 or 6 times before I get it. So sometimes I'll be driving and listening to a podcast. I just have to simply pull over at the side of the road and play back something 7 times and finally go, oh, okay, now I've got it. Because I can't think and drive at the same time. I don't have enough processing power. So it's a physical change, okay? Sorry it was so long. And I will now have some kombucha with kombucha. Whoa.
Yeah, with carbon dioxide. And thank you for the question, Raphael and Bernie. And Raphael and Bernie said that they do understand atoms, even though I don't think maybe they're in year 9. So that's excellent.
Leave it up to you guys.
Okay, so next question was from Nish and Mib in the book you said coffee was discovered by a farmer watching goats after they ate the coffee beans. How did they know to brew it, and did they make coffee with the poo?
Well, this is the story, and we don't know if it's true, but it's the standard story. So if you go back, way back, 2,000 years ago, you got Jesus Christ starting up his religion. And then around the 700s, you've got Muhammad starting up his religion, but he said that alcohol was forbidden. And in the early days, they used to have these incredibly long speeches that would go on for hours, and people would fall asleep. Separately from that, about 500 or 600 years after Islam started, there was a goat herder. This is the story. We have no proof. There's no written trail that a goat herder was herding his goats, and then noticed that there were these little red beans on a tree. You have a bite of it, yeah, yuck, really bitter. But when his goats would eat the red berries, mate, they start jumping all over the place. So he thought, I'll give this a go. So he ate about a handful of them, and he started getting, whoa, I'm all awake. This actually happened to me at one of my birthday parties when somebody gave me not just chocolate, but chocolate-coated coffee beans. And my little 4-year-old daughter was going, yum, chocolate, and started bouncing off the walls from having too much caffeine. Not in this case, not harmful at all. Anyway, and so from that, we had the idea that you could eat these things. And the trouble was it's really, really bitter. So they tried all sorts of different ways to get the good factor out of it. And they worked out they would grind it and then pour hot water over it. And you get something that smelled better than it tasted until you get to the espresso. And then I've got a story in there about how we've been making coffee the wrong way. So that's the story, we don't know if it's true, of how we humans discovered coffee. Oh, and the way it got into Europe was that in the, 16 or 1700s, the Turkish army invaded into Europe and got to Vienna almost, and then got pushed back. And as they retreated, they left behind bags of coffee beans. And the Viennese are saying, what's this stuff? And they played with it. And so now Vienna's famous for Viennese coffee.
That's great. I love the backstories, Karl. That's excellent. We'll come to a couple of other questions in a minute. I just wanted to go back to the book and talk about the speed of light. So a couple of questions. Firstly, why can nothing travel faster than the speed of light? And secondly, maybe we can travel faster than the speed of light.
Okay. Why can't we travel faster than the speed of light? We don't know why, but it does seem that you cannot travel faster across the fabric of space-time than the speed of light. It does seem to be, why that particular speed, we don't know. And when I say the fabric of space-time, we got 4 dimensions. You got backwards, forwards, and left, right, and up, down. So you can say, I'll meet you at the corner of 21st and 10th Street on the first floor at a coffee shop. So that's backwards, forwards, left, right, and up, down. And then you add the 4th dimension in, which is time, and you say, I'll meet you there at 10:30 for a cup of coffee or tea and a slice of cake. Okay, so there you got your 4 dimensions, right? And by the way, time, it has been proven, time is one of those dimensions. It's married. It's not a separate dimension. We see time as being quite different from space, but according to the mathematics, it's just married in with space. You don't talk about space, you talk about space-time. Okay, so you've got this space-time dimension, and it seems that the fastest you move across the fabric of space-time is the speed of light, but you can do that only if you have no mass. And so that's photons or electromagnetic waves. I won't go into the difference between them right now. But what you can do theoretically is actually move the fabric of space-time at much faster than the speed of light. And this actually happened way, way back in the past, about 13.8 billion years ago. So very shortly after the Big Bang happened, 13.8 billion years ago, at about 1 millionth of 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 a second, or if you like, 1 trillionth of 1 trillionth of 1 trillionth of a second, roughly, the universe, the fabric of space-time expanded. We don't know why. It expanded at much faster than the speed of light. And if it had not done that, the entire universe today would be smaller than the dot on the letter I in any of the words that have the letter I in my book. Mm. So we kind of have an inkling that you can move faster than the speed of light if when you're squashing or expanding or fooling around with the fabric of space-time. And a scientist called Miguel Alcubierre came up with a theory which nobody's been able to disprove. We don't know how to do it, but it's not impossible. Where suppose you want to go from, say, Adelaide to Melbourne to London. You want to get from Melbourne to London. And what you do is you contract all of the space in front of you and you expand the space behind you, and suddenly you're in London in zero time. Not really fast, zero. Now, there's a few problems with this. It does seem that as you arrive in London, you destroy it and everything else around it for a few light years. We're working on that. So, but anyway, it's called the Alcubierre effect, and that's mentioned in one of the stories in the book.
Brilliant, Karl. Now, a follow-up question to that. Raphael and Bernie have asked, if you're traveling at the speed of light, wouldn't everything be slow because the light isn't as fast as you?
Correct. Everything, in fact, would be zero speed. And in fact, that's a new theory that's just come out in the last week about black holes from Carlos Revillera, who's a cosmologist. And he reckons that stuff comes out of black holes because he reckons that the black holes don't squash down to zero size. Now, this is our current thinking. What we reckon is that the size of all black holes, whether they're 10 times the mass of the sun or billions of times the mass of the sun, the size of all black holes is zero. And he's saying, well, they don't actually squash all the way down for various reasons, but they get pretty close to zero. And then as stuff falls in, its time gets slowed down by this enormous gravitational field. This is 100% correct. We can measure with an atomic clock when you go from one story of a building to another, when you go from the third to the second story, when you get closer to the center of the earth by one lousy story, you're getting into a slightly higher gravitational field, and our atomic clocks are accurate enough to measure that. Our atomic clocks are also accurate enough to measure if you get onto a bicycle and travel at 15 kilometers an hour, your time slows down. We can measure that as well. So what he's reckoning is, and we don't know, this is interesting, that stuff falls into a black hole and then gets bounced out. But the reason we haven't seen anything coming out is that its time slows down so much that they're still on their way in and out. And the time for them to come out is several hundreds of times the age of the universe. And that's why we haven't seen it happen yet. Right. That's a theory. It's just a hypothesis.
We could be waiting a long time. This question has obviously sparked off quite a few budding astrophysicists and cosmologists in the room. So we've got a couple of follow-up questions. One from Andy. He says, if you travel faster than the speed of sound with headphones on, can you still hear the music from your headphones?
You and the headphones are traveling at the same speed, which is, 1.5 times the speed of sound. And so you can still have the sound going across and you can hear it. But if you're standing on the ground and then 20 meters above you, an aeroplane flies past at 1.5 times the speed of sound, you see it first and it goes past you, and a little bit later you hear it because the sound is catching up. And I was talking to a pilot who used to have fun in Texas, in San Antonio. And what he'd do is he'd tune his radio to the local radio station, which was KTSA, where I used to have a radio show for several years in Texas. And what he'd do was that he'd fly past the studios at faster than the speed of sound, and then half a second or so later, hear it coming through his headphone.
Yeah. That's great.
Because he's radio tuned to the radio station.
So a couple more questions along this line. Paige would like to know, how long is a light year?
It's 300,000, which is how many kilometers it does in a second, multiplied by 86,400, which is the number of seconds in a day, multiplied by 365. I think it's about 10 trillion kilometers. Can somebody look that up and type in the answer for us? I think a light year is about 10 trillion kilometers. I'm not sure.
Okay, so quite a long way. And so another question following up on this from Matilda is, so can we go backwards in time then?
Yes and no. With current technology, no. But it is not impossible. One way to look at it is to go back to the Big Bang. And when the universe started at the Big Bang, there weren't just 4 dimensions, left, right, backwards, forwards, up, down, and space, time, and time. There are about 11 or 12. And 7 or 8 of those dimensions curled up and went away, and we don't know where they are. And in this century, we might be able to find them. One of them, we're fairly sure from the mathematics, is a time dimension. What if it goes backwards? Because it's weird. With space, you can go backwards and forwards. But with the current time dimension, you can't. Maybe there's another time dimension you can go back in time. Secondly, there's at least 2 different methods for travelling backwards in time, worked out theoretically, but not ever worked out in practice. Method number 1 is and this comes from John Wheeler at the University of Texas at Austin. They've got a great Southwest music program every year. I highly recommend that you go there. Austin is like Boston. It's weird. Anyway, so what you do is you get a bunch of you get a bunch of neutron stars about 20 kilometers in diameter, and you reshape them into a cylinder, a kilometer in diameter, and 20 kilometers long. Kilometer in diameter, 20 kilometers long, and you spin it, I think about 1,000 revs per second, so that the circumference is traveling at half the speed of light. And then according to his mathematics, if you go into a tight orbit around this very quickly spinning cylinder of neutron star material, you'll be taken back in time to when that cylinder of neutron star material was first fashioned. Method number 2, wormholes. Now, we're not sure that wormholes exist. We can talk about that later if you want. But if they do, they allow you instantaneous transport from one place to another. Not just very fast, but instantaneous. There's a few problems, like you have to be a few trillion times smaller than a neutron. We'll look that out. So suppose you got a wormhole here going from there to there. And you take this end of it and you take it for a drive at very close to the speed of light for 1 hour. Because it's traveling at the very close to the speed of light, in an hour, it's aged 1 second. So this one here says that it's quarter to 4, but this end of the wormhole says it's quarter to 3. So if you go through that way, you go backwards in time. You go through that way, you go forwards in time. Nobody's ever proved that wormholes exist.
Excellent. Thanks for the question, Matilda. And maybe you might want to follow up that with, if you could travel backwards in time, when would you want to go back to? So maybe those of you who are interested could put that in the chat. What about you, Dr. Karl?
I would want to go back to a time when we had painkillers and antibiotics and vaccines. I do not think that pain makes you a better person. In the old days, people died of all sorts of diseases. There have been roughly 100 billion people born since about 50,000 years ago. For the overwhelming majority of them, the life expectancy was 10 years. Mate, I like painkillers, I like vaccines, I like antibiotics. If I could take some of those back with me in time, I'd be happy to go back.
Fabulous. We'll just go, thank you, Karl. We'll go to some of the other questions now. So Graham has asked, as an enthusiastic lover of science, do you feel you are preaching to the converted when you talk to young people?
No, we are converting the young, because if we said hateful things to them and we taught them to hate people with a different skin color, religion, number of arms and legs and fingers and so forth, they would be taught to hate. So what we're trying to teach them is that you don't have to hate, you can just stick to the science.
With that in mind, Elizabeth has asked then, what is your favorite science?
All of them. I used to really love physics because it gave me such a good mental toolbox, and mathematics, because once you prove something in mathematics, it's proved forever. There ain't no going back. 1 and 1 always equals 2, except for very high values of 1, in which case 1 and 1 can equal 3 or 4. But apart from that, 1 and 1 is always equal to 2. But then I went off and studied engineering, biomedical engineering to do with the human body, to make a machine that would either diagnose somebody with a disease or treat somebody with a disease. That's what you do in engineering, you make something. And to do that, I had to study this subject called physiology. Now, before I did physiology, I thought that the body was full of some sort of weird, chunky red salsa that would leak out if you got into a gunfight like on TV, and that was about it. But once I started studying physiology, there was a whole universe inside. And every subject I look at, I just love it to pieces. I'm really weak on geology. I've done a lot of travelling through the Australian outback. I spent 2 years travelling through the Australian outback, and I would love to do it again after I've done a course in geology so I could understand the thing. So I love all science. It comes up with so many surprises.
Excellent. Okay, we're going to move on to evolution now. So Andy has asked a question, and Andy said, why did evolution give humans kneecaps that can move around under the skin?
The basic rule with evolution is this. Evolution does not have to be perfect, just good enough to have babies. Man, the knee joint just sucks. Oh my God. Now think about the hip joint, right? It's a ball, and the ball sits inside a socket, and it's got inherent structural stability, and it holds itself together nicely. And normally you'll get 70 years out of one. The knee joint, oh my God, whoever designed that should be fired. It's like 2 pairs of soup bowls on top of each other. One over here, another one over there. And the soup bowls slide backwards and forwards, and they can just fall off. And so they're held together by gaffer tape at the left and the right and the front and the back, and even between the middle, like the anterior cruciate ligament. It is such a kludgy job. And if you look at any sport, and a netball player or a basketballer or a footballer comes off the field and they're limping, the commentator will say, oh, yes, the ACL, the anterior cruciate ligament, or the posterior aspect of the medial meniscus. Like you got these two, you got a soup bowl, right? And it's sort of sliding on top of another one, and you don't want to have ceramic to ceramic contact. You want to have a bit of a buffer. So there's a little ring like the letter O, to act as like a little bit of a cushion, except it's not an O. It's the letter C. If I'm pressing on something, like the letter O, it'll sort of hold itself together. But if I'm pressing on the letter C, it will open itself wider. And that's what happens to the posterior medial meniscus. Oh, man. And that kneecap, I'm with you. That kneecap is just dumb. Yep. Luckily, you just take care of your body and do all sorts of different sports and don't push anything too far. And if you're suffering any pain, stop immediately. I'm just reading through this older issue of the National Geographic on pain, and it's amazing, this whole thing about pain. It turns out that there are 3 different groups of people in the world who, because of mutations, do not feel pain. And they've got separate mutations. By the way, you do want to feel pain. You want to know if there's something wrong, like if there's a tiger gnawing at your leg, you want to notice that. Right?
It can be quite a problem, actually, can't it? Because if you don't know and experience that stuff as a child, then you don't necessarily learn what's dangerous, I suppose.
Sure. So one of them is a family in Pakistan, and they're circus performers. And they do amazing things, and they normally die in their 20s of a bone sticking through their skin because they broke it and it doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
Right. You want to feel pain, but not too much. I like painkillers. Okay, moving right along.
Okay, so Fiona's touched on a question which is very close, I think, to a lot of people's heart here in Clunes. We're in regional Victoria. Fiona says, we are farmers, we're harvesting at the moment. Yesterday, they were called to a fire started by a header, I presume on a combine harvester. Often there were also haystack fires. So she asks, for the header fires, is that caused by heat from static electricity? And for the haystack fires, is that from moisture heating up in the bales?
I know it's happening with the haystack fire. So that's called spontaneous combustion. And that's bacteria eating the food in the hay, the glucose molecules, and unfortunately generating a lot of heat. So if you go for a hard run and then somebody touches your skin, they'll say, gee, it's so hot and you're sweating. In the same way, bacteria, when they're eating hard, they're eating the glucose, which we can't eat for various reasons. They're generating a lot of heat, and if it's trapped, they can then set off a fire. Then separately from that is the header fire, and I definitely do not know. So if there's somebody there who does know, can you please give us an answer? I'd love to know. And then finally, there's spontaneous human combustion, which is caused by, and I quote, if it's real, we've only got 200 cases in 4 centuries, but Charles Dickens quotes one in Bleak House to get rid of the character. And if it's real, and I suspect that it is, my theory is that it's caused by decoupling of oxidative phosphorylation, which would take me about 5 minutes to explain. It's part of physiology and biochemistry. Let's leave that for another time. So somebody's got the answer for what was the fire? A header fire?
Header fire, yeah.
I'm kind of thinking static electricity, but I'm out of my depth. I've got no idea. I have no idea. Come on down, person who knows.
Okay, excellent. Let's go back to climate change, where we touched on earlier, and you said it's going to be the subject of your next book. And you mentioned that, this is a problem we can solve, we can stop it. So in that kind of line of thinking, Nish and Meave have asked, is it true that you can grow meat in a lab? And if so, will that help climate change?
Of all of the land used for agriculture, about 60 to 70% is used for cattle in one way or another, either for livestock to graze on or to grow crops like soybeans, which we then feed to the livestock, which is stupid. And it provides only 15% of our calories. So yes, I've actually done a story about this in my latest Great Moments in Science. So if you go to ABC, Dr. Karl and Meat, look that up on your search engine, that's my very latest story. And we're bringing the price down from $300,000 for a hamburger patty down to close to normal, like what you pay for meat. We've still got a way to go. We're getting closer. And so this meat has never seen sunlight or a field or an animal. It's grown entirely in laboratories, but of course we have to grow it in a way that's clean and green, et cetera, et cetera. Of course we do.
Okay, so with sort of keeping along that line of questioning then, Karl, talking about global warming and what we can do to stop global warming, thinking particularly about the younger audience here, what can they do now to help stop or help change the current situation around global warming?
The most effective thing they can do is, firstly, grow up and become a politician and boot out the politicians who deny the science of global warming. Secondly, tell your parents to take the money that they have invested in their superannuation out of any funds that invested in global warming, in coal, in any fossil fuels. Individually, you can't do much. So if you look at the world, the carbon footprint for each person on average is about 5 tons of carbon dioxide per year. In Australia and America, it's about 25. We're very wasteful. That means there must be a whole lot of people with much lower than 5 to bring the world average down to 5. And if in America there's a homeless person who doesn't have a house, who gets food by going to a soup kitchen where they get free food, they have, because they're in a very energy-hungry society, a carbon footprint of 8.5 tons. And they're not doing anything like flying or driving a car. So the most effective thing you can do is to go for a zero emissions car. That's about 2.5 tons. But even something like washing your clothes in cold water or hanging them on the line instead of a dryer, that's only 1/4 ton. We need action from the top, from the people who caused it, which is the fossil fuel companies, but they're funding a disinformation campaign currently up around $1 billion a year. They're spending, like big tobacco before them and big alcohol, they're spending $1 billion a year to try and convince people that there's no global warming, or if there is, it wasn't caused by us, or if it was caused by us, well, it's going to be better for you because you don't have to wear so many jumpers in winter. Shame about the bushfires. Or if it is bad, well, it's too late, we can't fix it. All of those are different lies told by the big fossil fuel companies, just like big tobacco. Nothing personal, it's just business.
Taking that then up to the next level then, Karl, that's obviously at an individual level, some of those things, but in terms of at a societal or a governmental level, how can we stop it? What do we need to do?
Oh, well, go to 2 websites, drawdown.org, drawdown.org, and download their 110-page brochure, and that'll take you a couple of hours to read. And that tells you what causes global warming and then how we can bring emissions down to zero and even go negative. And then go to BZE, which stands for Beyond Zero Emissions.org.au. That's an Australian site. And then download their documents and read them. And that tells you how we can not only stop global warming, we can reduce it. Jobs in fossil fuels are so microscopic. They've got such massive expenditures on automation and trucks that drive themselves. Whereas if you go for jobs in renewables, it's 3 to 4 times as many jobs. And wait for it, they're all local. You don't have to go flying to Western Australia and leave your family. So we're better. And in Australia, while the arts generate about 9% of our GDP, natural gas generates not 9%, not 2%, 0.2%. Hardly anything at all. And for some reason, they keep on saying it's absolutely essential for the country. No, it's not. Global warming is real and we can fix it. Just vote the politicians out when you get to be old enough to be a politician. I'll vote for you.
It's, and I think that's the point, isn't it? So it's interesting. I mean, BZE, I was actually one of the contributing authors of their stationary energy report back in 2010.
You're kidding?
Yeah. No, yes.
I love that. Mate, if we had gone down that pathway, Australia could have been the first country in the world to be totally free, because you look at all of the 17 or so different types of renewables, and just with 2 of them, solar thermal would provide 60% of our electricity, and wind would provide 40%, providing we have a grid across the country, across a nullarbor. Were you one of the authors of that?
Yeah, and the biomass backup, I think, was the 3rd component.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Wow. I mean, respect, man.
Well, I think my scientific credentials are kind of, way down compared to yours, Dr. Karl. But yeah, I mean, I suppose the point being is that when we were working on that back in 2009, 2010, we put together a roadmap for 2020. It was, it was the Zero Carbon Australia 2020 was the plan. We were in 2020. We're certainly getting a little bit along that way, but we are nowhere near, where we could have been. And one of the really interesting stats in that report, and now I'm going off memory, and I probably could pull it off my shelf here, but the actual cost for GDP, I think was they worked it out that what it would cost would be the same as the amount of money that we lose on gambling every year. In terms, it was when you actually all the money that gets basically spent on gambling would be this amount of money it would cost spread over 10 years to fund the change to a 100% renewable energy.
That's right. It was $37 billion a year for 10 years,
yes,
which is less than we spend on recreation gear, which is $42 billion a year, and about equals to what we spend on gas, coal, and uranium. Wait for the fourth word, investments. Okay. They're not investments. There's no money given back. The Australian government gives $37 billion to gas, coal, and uranium companies, and they take it out of Australia. It never comes back. Yeah. And each citizen, so for example, I can see Kim over there, and John and Graham and Janet, each of you is paying about $2,100 in subsidies to a fossil fuel company. And if, Raphael, if you're not paying $2,100 because you don't have an income, well, your parents are paying it for you. We each pay, averaged out across Australia, $2,100 in subsidies to fossil fuel companies, and yet they're fabulously wealthy. Already the fossil fuel companies get 8% of every dollar in revenue to a government on Earth. Think about all the money that all the governments on Earth get, and the fossil fuel companies get given as a present 8 cents out of every dollar. I guess spending $1 billion on a disinformation campaign for 30 years is cheap then.
It's small change, right?
Yeah, if you're getting that much for free. It's like big tobacco, like with regard to big alcohol. In 2018, in every single hospital in Australia appeared a big poster, not A3 or A2 or A1, A0, a big poster. And it showed a woman without a head, who was a patriarchy, standing sideways and a pregnant belly. And the first paragraph said, it has not been proved that drinking alcohol is dangerous for the unborn child of a pregnant woman. And this was in every hospital in Australia, and it was lies. Now, the reason that they did it, big alcohol, was that there are all these human beings called pregnant women who had been told that drinking alcohol is bad for the baby. Now, big alcohol didn't specifically want to have malformed babies. They just wanted to sell more alcohol. And there was this whole group of people called pregnant women who weren't drinking. And they just wanted to make them drink. Nothing personal. It was just business. And they had to pull out all the posters. And that was in 2018. Wow.
Scandalous. And, just reading some of the comments from some of our younger attendees, it's clear where, the common sense lies here. Nish and Meave have said, if they spent that money on the poor, there would be no more poor, which is, that's an excellent comment. Thank you. Paige has also said that they read a book on politics. So well done, Paige. That's excellent.
Yep.
Keep going with that.
Keep going. Oh, by the way, on politics, if you suggest to somebody that they should run for politics, in most cases they'll say, no, I couldn't do it. And at that moment, the current politicians have won. They have convinced you not to boot them out. And if you don't boot them out, they stay there being crooked. I mean, think about the robo-debt thing. Kids, get your parents to explain robo-debt, where it was automatically assumed that most people in Australia on Social Security had been stealing the money, and so they had to pay it back, and fake figures were made up, and hundreds of people committed suicide. And even today, the government is denying it.
Okay, so I think there's a pretty strong message here, is that keep reading your politics books.
Yes.
Keep putting pressure on your parents, your politicians, and grow up, and when you grow up and become adults, make sure that you keep challenging those who are elected to represent you. We are past 4:00. Are you?
One more question?
We've got maybe one more question.
Yeah.
We'll go
2 more. I'll try and hit them quick. Okay.
2 more questions.
Okay.
So moving away to a totally different topic, Andy would like to know, do scientists know why yawning is contagious?
We do not know why, but we know that it is. So if I start talking about yawning, people will, after a little while, begin to feel the desire to yawn. And if you are one of the people who can catch a yawn from somebody else, you generally have two characteristics. One, you're a kind and compassionate person. And number two, you can show it. There are some people who are kind and compassionate, but they're just shy. They tend not to catch yawns. And yawning is a sign of not necessarily being tired, because you can have athletes just before they're ready to run in the 100 metres who have been well rested, they will yawn. And whenever the Siamese fighting fish is ready to have a fight, it will yawn. And also yawning can be a sign of a recovery from a sudden or acute unexpected illness. And so on one occasion, I was on an aeroplane halfway between Adelaide and Perth, and this guy started having a heart attack, and there was nothing I could do. The nitroglycerine was out of date, blah, 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 blah. And then I'm thinking, this guy's going to drop dead on me, and I can't do a single thing. No defibrillators, no nitroglycerine, no nothing. And then he yawned. And I remember the lectures of my teachers that he was going to get better, and he did. And why do we yawn? We think it's some sort of social bonding. If I yawn and you catch it, then I think, oh, you're my best friend. Let's go and hunt a dinosaur together or something like that.
Excellent. Our dog yawns when she's anxious, Jane Thompson says.
Oh, I know nothing about dog yawns. Really? So your dog yawns when, and musicians, when they're about to go on stage, will sometimes yawn. They just can't stop it when they're really anxious. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, our last question then. And I've also observed that with my dog too, and Paige says most dogs do that. But our last question is from Raphael and Bernie. Why do trees look like they're moving slow in the car when they're further away and faster when closer?
The speed at which they travel across your field of view is very fast when they're close. So imagine you're in an aeroplane and you've just about hit, and you're sitting near the window, and you're up to around 300 kilometres an hour, and you look out the window because you're sitting near the window, and the ground's just sort of whizzing past because you're very close to it, and it passes across your field of view quite quickly. But 30 minutes later, you're up there at 30,000 feet, you're now going 3 times faster, 900 kilometres an hour, not 300, but because it's so far away, the ground just sort of crawls past your field of view. So it's just called perspective or 3D geometry or similar triangles.
All great mathematics and physics that you can go on to learn if you follow a career in science. Excellent. So a lot of thank yous coming through on the chat, Karl. I want to obviously offer my own thank you for your time today. It's been really enlivening and so I think uplifting to hear from you and for your generosity.
Okay. One more question. One last question.
Okay, one last question. Well, I don't have any through here. Oh, here we go. Why does some of them are Lana and Poppy. Why does the moon seem to always follow you when you're driving in a car?
Because it's a long way away. So imagine that you're an insect and you want to navigate and it's nighttime. Well, what they've evolved over a period of time is that if they're at nighttime and the moon is over there, well, you keep on flying and keep the moon over there. And so if you keep the moon over there, you can pretty well fly in a straight line. But if you come near a campfire and you keep the light over there, you just end up going in a circle around it. So why does it seem to do that? Because it's so far away, and it's used by insects and various birds for navigating, and that's why they get thrown off by city lights and campfires and lights in your veranda as well.
Excellent. Okay. Look, thank you again, Dr. Karl. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. Really great questions. And I think a lot of appreciation, a lot of love here on the chat for you, Karl. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day. Everyone else, have a lovely day. And we hope to see you again for the next Booktown online.
That'd be lovely.
Thank you very much, Karl. Thank you very much, Paul. And just a reminder that you can buy Karl's books at Readings online. Readings are one of our main supporters. So thank you once again for everybody attending, and look forward to seeing you again.
Booktown on Sunday is presented by Creative Clunes. Tax-deductible donations to keep our stories alive can be made at creativecloons.org.au.